check out the new Thin Green Line podcast, hosted on patreon.com. That's patreon.com. It's a members-only podcast where game wardens John Norris and Wayne Saunders talk about wildlife law enforcement, the outdoors, environmental subjects mixed with current events, and what members want to hear. Join them and become a part of the Thin Green Line. Keep wildlife out of your trash. The Wildlife Trash Safe developed by Presby Steel does just that. It is made of 14-gauge steel, welded construction, and holds a 32-gallon trash can or 10 kitchen bags. It has been black bear tested and was developed in conjunction with the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department. They are lockable, rollable, and they have free delivery in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. Call today, 603-752-3022 or presbysteel.com. That's presbysteel.com. Keep the wildlife wild and out of your trash with a Wildlife Trash Safe. Guidefitter is the industry network for professional outdoor guides and outfitters, the trusted destination for consumers seeking and sharing guided hunting and fishing experiences of a lifetime, and the enterprise influencer marketing platform for outdoor brands. Guidefitter and its members represent the pulse of the guided hunting and fishing industry. Guidefitter's outdoor partners provide discounts to select types of outdoor professionals, including game wardens, members of the military, guides, outfitters, and other outdoor professionals. Over 145 brand partners and counting. Gear across many categories, including packs, footwear, clothing, flashlights, knives, optics, even firearms and ammo. For more information, go to guidefitter.com/wardenswatch. That's Warden's Watch, all one word. I'm Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and I'm a member of Guidefitter.
We love our children. We protect them. We guide them. We prepare them for life in the world. With all that we do, from deep in our hearts, we cannot control all things. Life-threatening illnesses and disabilities affect far too many of our children each year. While we cannot change the circumstance, we can make dreams come true. Dreams to provide hope, to provide spiritual healing and strength, to provide moments of happiness and relief in the hardest of times. We can give a glimmer of light and hope in a time of darkness and despair. Join huntofalifetime.org to help make dreams come true, to provide hope for children with life-threatening illnesses and disabilities. Hunt of a Lifetime is a nonprofit organization fulfilling dreams for hunting and fishing trips to youth 21 and under with life-threatening illnesses and disabilities. Visit huntofalifetime.org to learn how you can make a difference.
This podcast is brought to you by Maine, Operation Game Thief, and Wildlife Heritage, a foundation of New Hampshire at nhwildlifeheritage.org, and International Wildlife Crime Stoppers. Please join me, Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and other game wardens on our adventures protecting wildlife, saving lives, and having fun, all while serving the public and the natural resources of our planet. Listen to the tales and experiences of those who work in the outdoors while being entertained with stories about encounters with poachers, wildlife investigation, murder investigation, near-death experiences, search and rescue missions, wildlife interactions from game wardens around the country and around the world. When I retired, I realized I couldn't let go of that legacy, but rather wanted to share the passion, the commitment, and the stories of those men and women that call themselves game wardens. This is Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and this is Warden's Watch. Warden's Watch, episode 35, Rick Wilcox, mountaineer and IME owner, so International Mountain Equipment owner in North Conway, New Hampshire. You know, the reason I interviewed Rick Wilcox is because he was very instrumental in helping build our search and rescue team, which is very technical, maybe probably not as technical as those guys operate at, but very technical so we can operate. And John, you built a team when you built your special operations team for the marijuana eradication, and you must have reached out to these specialized people that have all these talents and to bring them in to teach you so you can become the best that you guys can be in your realm.
Yeah, absolutely, Wayne. And Rick brings such a unique skill set and quality to to search and rescue and anything in the Thin Green Line as a game warden. And, we went to the Marine Mountain Warfare Training Center up in the Eastern Sierra Mountains of California. And it was those groups and military groups with ropes courses and rappelling and mountaineering. And we had a couple of pretty seasoned mountain climbers actually on the team that had summited like El Capitan and Yosemite and done some pretty big mountains. Nothing like Rick did, being one of the first to summit Everest. I think back in, like you said, 93. So man, what a great guy to get to know. And yeah, that is the best of the best from the standpoint of teaching any search and rescue team, especially game wardens, to get them to that skill set. Because what not everybody realizes is, as you and I have discussed many times before, is the extreme mountain elevations you guys have out on the East Coast in your state, and the wind speeds that are up there that are, that actually rival that you would see on an Everest climb or a K2 or anything of the tier 1 most arduous peaks around the globe. Great stuff hearing from him, and the stuff he has to share is amazing. I think our listeners are going to love it.
No doubt. And just to have that expertise in basically my backyard is pretty awesome, to be able to go down and sit with him and talk him about his experience in Nepal and climbing so many other peaks. And then last year, if you remember we had 11 deaths on Everest, and they had those iconic pictures of the lines of people to summit it. And Rick explains all that very well. And I almost couldn't wait till the end. I get towards the end of the podcast to ask him those questions, but I almost couldn't wait, because for me, that's what I wanted to get to. I wanted to know why are all these problems? And he lays that out, explains it. And the difference is from when he summited Everest, and he only summited it once. I guess you only have to hit it once. That's once you hit it, I'd leave it alone. But he's done a lot of other peaks in Nepal and runs climbing expeditions around the world to hit these peaks. And
wow.
It's a pretty awesome to have him on board to work with us. And we still, they operate at a level above the game wardens, but he certainly brought the game wardens up quite a few levels to operate with those guys in conjunction. So, it's a pretty dynamic podcast. And without further ado, Rick Wilcox.
Today's podcast is with Rick Wilcox of Mountain Rescue Service. Rick's been with Mountain Rescue Service. He was the president for 40 years, and you're still with Mountain Rescue Service, aren't you, Rick?
Yes, I'm still a director and team leader, though recently, as we all went out the door, one of the younger guys turned to me and said, "Why don't you skip this one?" And that was great. That was the river rescue that we did over in Franconia just a little while ago. All-nighter, getting some guy out of a flooded river in the over in by the basin, and recently got an award for that with the river rescue team and the mountain rescue team.
Nice. And that's certainly an interview I'm going to do too with Darren and the Swiftwater Rescue Team.
That's right.
So that's an important relationship too. So, but the relationship with the Mountain Rescue Service and Fish and Game goes way back, and 40 years ago. When was Mountain Rescue Service actually established?
Mountain Rescue was established in 1972 by a group of people that represented Fish and Game, like Bill Hastings, Forest Service, which would be Brad Ray, AMC, Brian Fowler, and Roger Damon, Dan Bodine. These people were on the Appalachian Mountain Club Search and Rescue Committee, and they felt that it was time to put together a specialized technical team that could operate on the cliffs and the winter conditions above Treeline on Mount Washington that go beyond the normal capabilities of AMC, Fish and Game, Forest Service. And so they created the Mountain Rescue Service. Then they came to the climbers and said, guess what? You guys are the team that are going to go and do these rescues. And at the time, the relationship between the climbing community and, let's say, Fish and Game and local fire departments and Forest Service wasn't bonded quite yet. They kind of looked at climbers as people that lived in their cars and were kind of weird people and weren't very responsible. And what they found out was over the years, and what I found out was,
and a lot of them did during that time, right?
Well, they did, yeah. They needed to be rounded up,
right?
Yes,
right,
for sure,
exactly.
For sure. There's no question about that. But looking at people who are climbers like myself, I have a degree in forestry. That's what I went. I knew I wanted to be outdoors.
Your passion's in the outdoors.
I could have been a fish and game officer.
Absolutely.
Easily.
Yes.
If my career had gone a little different. Half of the snow ranges, more than half of the snow ranges, worked for me at one time or another as mountain guides. Nice. Now they all work up on my Washington. People like Frank Karras, the head snow ranger. He worked for me for years.
Yes.
All the guys up there. A lot of them move on to, better paying jobs with Forest Service. And I know that Alex Loboshansky could easily have worked for me as a guide.
Absolutely.
And that's how we got to know each other before he was in Fish and Game. And when he went to get into Fish and Game, I said, that he'd be a great Fish and Game guy.
And I've always found you guys are such a resource for information, too. It's just not calling you up and sending you out to do the stuff that we really can't, or actually we're integrated with you now, but we weren't originally. But, just the experience on the mountains. And, I think for a new lieutenant, they're foolish not to call and ask Rick Wilcox what he thinks on a mission.
Well, I'm quite honored to be in that position today. But, yes, 500 rescues later,
yes,
we've learned our lessons. And
you earned that honor.
Well,
and there's
thank
many other people. Mike Pelchik was one I called on a regular basis to get that type of information, too. So.
Yes, and it's all teamwork. Yes. It's taking the resources of Fish and Game, the skills of the mountain climbers and mountain rescue, Mike's team like AVSAR, and just putting it all together and being very efficient in terms of our use of manpower is what it really works out to. If you have a search going on and there's areas that are technical, you put mountain rescue over there. You got areas that aren't quite so technical, you put AVSAR, PEMI in those areas. You got somebody in the river, you go get the river guys, and it all works really good.
All different search and rescue teams we're talking about that come together.
Bring in that Black Hawk. We love riding around in that.
Absolutely. So, but it wasn't always that way. When we talk about like Bill Hastings in the beginning, I mean, he kind of pointed, right?
Yeah, we had some interesting first events. I remember one on Iron Mountain where a tourist had fallen off the top of the cliff there and needed a rescue. And Pete Lyons was in his car, and we arrived at the scene of the trailhead, and the window came down, and Pete said, they're up there on the cliff, go get them. And up the window went, and off we went, and the air conditioner went back on in his car. And we needed a helicopter, and I called on the radio to Pete, and I said, get the helicopter. And he brought it in, and we saved a life, and it was good. But, there wasn't much backup for Fish and Game there at the time. And we also had a similar event occur in North Conway with back in the 70s, early 70s. There was a head of the rescue team in North Conway Fire Department was a guy named Fudd Chinook. And Richard Chinook was his real name. And
Chinook.
And he went by Fudd. And Fudd was this great big, he was the nicest guy in the world. He was the perfect guy for a rescue. He could, in-town car rescues, fires, things like that. They were great. Well, we had a guy who was swimming at over at Echo Lake and saw the climbers on Whitehorse and decided that, hey, that didn't look so bad. So in his bathing suit, he went up halfway up Whitehorse.
Oh, boy.
Lake. And so he's up there, hanging on by his fingernails and yelling for help. And so the fire department and the police and everybody went over there, and they kind of roped off the area. And I saw them all go over, and I said, I wonder what's going on over there. So I drove over with a couple of the climbers, and I saw Fudd, and we didn't really know each other at the time quite yet. And I went over to Fudd, and I said, hey, can we help? We're climbers. And he goes, no, stand back. The police came over and said, could you guys move back a little?
Right.
I said, okay, but we're not going to go home. We're going to watch and see what happens. Well, they were funneling around with their fireman suits and didn't have the right shoes or ropes or anything. So just went out for an hour or two. And meanwhile, the guy's up there, help. So I went over to Fudd again. I said, hey, Fudd, give us 10 minutes. Give us 15 minutes. Just see if we can help you guys out. When we get the guy down, he's all yours. And he finally said, okay. And so we went up 15 minutes. We grabbed the guy. We brought him down. This is our backyard. This is our playground. And we delivered him to the North Conway Rescue. And Fudd came over to the store later, and he said, Rick, you guys are pretty good at that, aren't you? And I said, yeah, we are. But we don't do, burning houses, car crashes. That's your department.
Specialized.
So why don't we work together? When you have a call for a rescue on Whitehorse or Cathedral, just give us a ring. We'll meet you over there. You guys can provide the ambulances. You can do a litter crew from the bottom of the cliff over to the ambulance. You've got the paramedics, lights at night. But, stay off the cliff. We'll take care of that. And you know what? Over the years, probably 100 rescues over there, and we worked together with them perfectly.
Wow.
Great combination.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And then we just kind of evolved with that into, I know Rick, Estes, Lieutenant Estes, and you worked very closely together to integrate fish and game officers more into the rescue. And I still don't think, I think some of them are up to the level maybe, but not everybody, So we still use you, or the Fish and Game Department uses you quite often when it gets too technical or we don't have enough people for that technical stuff.
Yes. I think that what happened during the 70s was that every time there was a cat in a tree, they called mountain rescue. Every time there was a sprained ankle at, Diana's Bass, it was called mountain rescue. So pretty soon we were doing, a rescue a week. And Rick Estes, Lieutenant Estes, who I have the greatest friendship with, came over to me and he said, how about we create in Fish and Game an elite team? These are game wardens who can go beyond opening a window in the car and closing the window. Mm-hmm. We're going to get them in the field. We're going to get them out there. We're going to train them. We're going to equip them. And they're going to become maybe not the elite technical team that we are, but they're going to be able to do winter searches. They're going to be able to go out overnight. They're going to be able to do litter carries. They're going to be in the field side by side with you guys. And I'll tell you what some of the benefits of that were. One of the big things that we had going on was when we arrived at the scene of an accident where somebody was dead, we had to determine, Mountain Rescue had to determine whether there was any foul play.
Right.
And we're not trained to do that.
Right.
We don't know forensic things that you guys know.
We've had some of those that have been foul play.
Over the years, we've had a lot. Yeah. And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't.
Right.
But having a game warden with you to make those determinations, to say, don't touch that person until I've done my job. And, 99% sure the guy fell off the cliff or he's froze to death out in the backcountry. Something happened and it didn't go right for him, but he wasn't murdered. But we've had murders. So we've had a lot of jumpers jump off Cathedral Ledge. And I've spent time, I remember with Marty Garabedian, I spent a whole day seeing where the footsteps were. See, was this guy pushed off the cliff or did he jump? These are things that you guys as professionals have to solve, and we can mess it up. So when you get to, a guy like, I just remember Brian was always out there. He was one of your great...
Brian Abrahms, one of our local officers here.
Yes, and we miss him.
Yes.
But he was a great asset to Fish and Game in terms of he wanted to be with us all the time. And I remember being with him on top of Pinnacle Gully in about 100-mile-an-hour wind, minus 20. We're looking for two guys that were lost in Pinnacle Gully on Mount Washington, and Brian was with me, and we found them at the top, frozen, solid.
Wow.
And Brian sat down next to him, and he said, where do you think these guys are, Rick? And I said, look to your right. The guy next to you is dead. He's not alive. He's just in a sitting position. And he went, oh!
Oh, my goodness.
And so he was there. And so he was able to determine that when the weather got better, we'd come back and move them up to the auto road, actually, from there. But we wouldn't take them down. But we miss him. But I've worked with so many of these game wardens over the years, Jeff Gray, and then Marty and Todd Bogatis, Rick Estes. Rick was great because he trained us in GPS.
Right.
And he had his own little business going on the side where he would teach us GPS skills. And I know he taught...
And Rick grabbed that. As soon as GPS came out, he grabbed that. And I have one of the first GPSs ever. And, he learned that and he taught it to us. And, what a skill that he was able to bring right on the board right away. So,
yes. Yeah, absolutely.
It was so helpful.
Yeah. Well, everybody in Mountain Rescue took the course at least twice with him. Mm-hmm. And periodically, as we did our trainings, Rick would come in and do a refresher and keep us up to date on all the latest. Yeah,
technology's been a helpful thing and a hindering thing. So I think that's probably in most cases and most things. So.
I think that's one of my only concerns about cell phones and spot devices and all these new things they have is that if you use those as your security blanket, we can keep going because we have a cell phone, or we can keep going because we have a spot and get yourself into trouble, where if you didn't have those devices, you might not have made those decisions. then you have to be very, very responsible. This whole thing with Kate.
Matrosova, the risk management, we talked about that earlier, you and I.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, she had every freaking electronic device. She had a spot and a cell phone and a GPS
satellite
and all this
phone.
stuff. And as Rick Estes put it, after we chatted about this incident, he said, well, you couldn't eat one of those. You can't get in it and stay warm.
Right.
It's not a piece of clothing. It's not a tent. It's not a sleeping bag. They're just
all
pieces
affected
of
by the cold,
electronics.
too.
And when the batteries get cold, they don't work right.
Yes. Yeah,
So,
absolutely. So, but, how'd you get here? Like, let's go back to how Rick Wilcox got to be a mountaineer.
Well, when I was in high school down in Massachusetts in the North Shore, I joined the Appalachian Mountain Club and took their rock climbing lessons. By the age of 16.
Like 16?
Yeah, when I got my driver's license.
Wow.
The day I was 16, I got it. And I was tearing around. I did all the 4,000 footers in New Hampshire by the time I think I was 16.
Sleeping in your vehicle.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so when I went to college, I went to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and I ran into some mountain climbers out there and actually used one of my college loans to go on my first expedition. I've been on 67 expeditions so far. Wow. But my first one was to Alaska in 1969 when I was a junior in college, and my parents never knew I took my college loan and spent it on the expedition instead of that semester, but I got through because I was working, so I stayed in college.
You worked your butt off to make up for it, didn't you?
I did, and I still slept in a basement there somewhere that semester, but it worked. And
that gave you the bug, though, your first expedition?
I did great. Relative to the rest of the group, I was good at high altitude. I was on my first glacier. I was on my first big mountain.
And you were hooked.
I did okay. And so I was encouraged that, my dreams of someday going to the Himalayas or going to the big mountains in the Andes were I wasn't shut down with one of those guys who couldn't go up to high altitude or something like that. So that was good. It was a good experience. It certainly was better than what I ever would have learned that semester if I had to drop out of college. I mean, I stayed in, I got my degree. Everything worked out all right there. And while I was in Amherst, Eastern Mountain Sports opened a store in Amherst, Massachusetts, and they offered me a job when I graduated to work in Boston, which I really didn't want to do, but I did. I took the job, and they said, well, would you like to work in a store in North Conway, New Hampshire? And I said, yeah. And my parents actually own land in Eaton, and I've been up here every summer.
And you've been up here hiking every 4,000 footer you could.
I met Henry Mock as a counselor.
Our former major, yeah.
And I used to go out with him when he was just the basic game officer, and we'd ride around together. And he'd check on fishermen, and I'd go hiking, and we'd meet for dinner, and we got along great.
Nice.
And that's how I met Henry, and I was up here as a camp counselor. And so I moved up here in 1971 full-time and lived in a little camp down in Eaton that I built for my parents. And the things started to evolve. We had the climbing school here. I was teaching some rock climbing and ice climbing that I'd learned, from my prior experiences at college in the AMC. We had the retail store, and I tried to go climbing somewhere every year, like in Yosemite or maybe up again to Alaska. Take a climbing trip, climbed in the Alps, and eventually in 1971, went on my first trip down to Peru to the Andes.
Wow.
And so my...
now, when you went, did you go as a group or pretty much, yourself?
These were originally personal climbing trips, but then I began offering a little bit later when I took over International Mountain Equipment in 1979. I started offering international trips to customers who wanted to go climb, like Mount McKinley. Mm-hmm. We had an arrangement up there in Alaska. We went down to Peru. And climbed the highest peaks down there. We went to Aconcagua, which is in Argentina, and climbed the highest peak in the Western Hemisphere, which is one of the 7 summits, Aconcagua.
Nice.
We did that a bunch of times. And so each year we were doing some guiding internationally. We were teaching ice climbing and rock climbing in North Conway. I wrote the first book on ice climbing, of which there's 4 editions. Nice. We're still selling the ice climbing guide. And It's due for an update, but nobody seems to be able to do it. So the guide we've got is still selling well. So in then we started the Ice Festival here, which is a big event here. It was the first one of its kind in America. There are now 20 or 30 of them, but we were the first. As you know, the White Mountains are a fantastic ice climbing resource. So, you know, as the years went on,
you're developing as
I got
the kid that slept in the car. Now that
that's right,
you're developing in the kid that goes to South America to climb peaks. So, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and of course the mountain rescue, the relationship with the Fish and Game evolved. Forest Service with Brad Ray and Rennie up there. Then eventually Chris Jewson, who took it over from Brad.
And we're talking about their snow rangers in the White Mountains because,
that's right.
And that's a pretty unique thing in the Forest Service too. I think are they the only snow rangers within the Forest Service, or?
I think they have similar people out west.
Okay.
But only ones on the East Coast.
Only ones on the East Coast, yeah.
And Mount Washington is a great asset for mountaineers here. It has everything but high altitude. It has, kick your butt weather in the winter. It has great ice. It has great snow. It has avalanches. It has great skiing. It's a great place for...
Because it doesn't have the altitude, do you think people don't take it as seriously?
Oh, yeah, I think so. They say, how can a small mountain like that be so serious?
Yeah, exactly.
And it is.
yeah.
And I mean, how many deaths up there? 160 or 70?
And growing.
Now? Yeah. I mean...
And I think that's the reason why they don't take it serious.
It's
a 6,000 footer, big deal.
Yeah, that's right.
You know?
They say meters or feet. I say feet. 6,000 meters is like Mount McKinley, 20,000 feet. So
yeah.
No, it's got the above tree line, the jet stream. So what North Conway means to me, Mount Washington and the cliffs like Whitehorse Cathedral, Cannon Cliff, which I love, is its base camp. And I learned my skills here. I learned hiking, camping, backpacking. I learned rock climbing, ice climbing, alpinism on Mount Washington, big wall climbing on Cannon. I went to Yosemite and climbed big walls. Went good.
Yeah.
I went to bigger mountains, used the skills I learned on Mount Washington, and it went good.
And you're teaching these skills,
and I didn't even kill myself. I'm still here.
That's great.
I used up a few of my lives, but I think a lot of it was my attitude that it doesn't matter whether you get to the top or not. It matters that you come down alive.
Yes.
And I think
that's
when we
a great
look at
attitude.
some of our missions, our rescue missions over the years, have been people who feel that I'm going to do this or die, and they die.
Yes.
They're
driven
Jeremy
type A
Haas
people.
on Jefferson. You probably remember that one.
Yes.
And Tinkham, there he died. And then, of course, Kate. And so many times, the guys, when I was up in Pinnacle Gully with
goal-orientated people, and that's
Brian.
What they got to do.
And this sort of attitude that the weather forecast is really going to get bad this afternoon and tonight, but we can do it. We can get up there in the morning early and get this thing knocked off. Well, these guys in Pinnacle Gully, the two that died, they got a late start. The weather came in. They got trapped, and they died.
Yes.
And if they just said, why don't we go climbing in Crawford Notch today instead of Mount Washington, they could have had a nice day ice climbing and been at the bar that night having a beer.
Yep.
Instead of us going out and,
but it was in their schedule to do this, and that's, some people just don't appreciate the weather changing and how it changes and how drastic it gets because they have it scheduled. They're goal-orientated people, and
that's right.
Those type A people are probably more danger to themselves in Mother Nature than anything else, because Mother Nature, as we know, can not be kind at times. So
exactly, and what we tell people when they're planning their hike up Mount Washington or whatever is, don't think of what you're going to be doing at 4:00 this afternoon when you're starting out at 8 or 7 in the morning. Every hour, assess the situation. How am I doing? Am I going as fast as I thought I would go? How am I feeling? How is the weather? How is my partner doing? He's not as fast as I am. Maybe we should slow down. Maybe we should turn back. Maybe we should change our plan. Making these decisions rather than saying, oh, we're going to get to the top and then we'll decide what to do.
Right.
Is the secret to staying alive, I think.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. If everybody does that, we wouldn't have any problems in the Whites, or anywhere else.
That's right. A little bit of common sense thrown in there.
Yeah, I like the idea of getting back alive. So
I think
that's the goal, not to reach the peak.
Yeah. Another great thing that Todd Bogatis did was to create the Hike Safe program, and he printed up these little cards that have like a I think there's 14 or 13 items that you should have in your backpack if you're going out on a hike in the White Mountains. A headlamp, extra food, extra water, a jacket, hat. Plan to be out overnight. I know it's not an overnight trip, but what if you have to spend the night out? Do you have something in your pack that would allow you to get through the night so that people like us, Fish and Game, Forest Service, whoever, Mountain Rescue, can come to you and aid you and get you out of there? But a lot of people spend the night out before we get to them.
No
if
doubt.
They don't have the gear in their pack. It's a long night. Some
Absolutely.
of them don't make it.
And that's just to get you there. You know, people can break legs, and you have to live right there where you broke your leg. So if it's in your pack, you can actually facilitate your own rescue, or at least sustain your own, you know, being alive until someone can get you. Because, you know, that's having all that in the pack is just priceless.
That's right. And I tell people, rather than saying you're going to be the problem, I say, what if you come across an injured climber in your hike? Are you prepared to spend the night with them?
Right.
While help comes. You are the rescue team. So you need the gear.
Nope.
So there you go.
Yep. And it's not that hard to have the life-sustaining gear with you.
Not really, no.
You know, it's those 10 essentials or small 10 essentials you throw in there. Pay attention to the weather, dress appropriately, bring extra clothing, you know, strip it off if you don't need it, and just throw it in. The clothing they're making now is crazy. You know, it's so high-tech and so good.
Yeah, and it's not going to make your pack, 80 pounds. It's going to be, maybe add 5 or 8 pounds to your pack.
Yep, and that could save your life, 5 or 8 pounds. So for sure. Your experience overseas, and let's get to the top, the Everest thing. That's always the most interesting thing when I listen to you. And you know what's interested me lately is just seeing Everest on the news with all the deaths and the line to the top. And how long have you been climbing Everest for? Because you've had quite a lot of experience there.
Well, I, like most young climbers, read all the books about Mount Everest, about Sir Edmund Hillary, and then the Whittaker. Jim Whittaker was the first American to climb it, and all about the Himalayas. And I really felt that I wanted to go do that someday. And so as my career progressed, and I got to be about 35 years old, I knew that it was time to go to the Himalayas. That I had been to all these other mountain ranges, but I had never been to the Himalayas. And I went on a Polish expedition, actually, which was great. They taught me how to go cheap. Like the Fish and Game taught me a lot. These guys taught me how you cannot spend money on stuff. So we went to a peak called Choi Oyu. Choi Oyu is the 6th highest peak in the world. It's right next to Mount Everest. The hike in is very similar. You just go up a different valley. And I was in there for 3 months with them and a good friend of mine, Mark Ritchie from Boston, who's a world-class climber. And we did a very successful climb on the south face of Choi Oyu, which has never been repeated. We were able to climb not to the very summit of Choi Oyu, but to the peak next to it called Gazumpakan 1, which is the 18th highest peak in the world, and did the 3rd ascent of the peak and by a new route. And that's probably one of my greatest climbs ever, even though my mother never heard of that.
It sounds it.
So the next year...
And the route's never been repeated?
No.
And
they all go up.
It's difficult,
there's a
right?
normal route on Choi Oyu. They all go up on the Tibetan side, which I actually climbed later. Yeah. I guided it.
And why'd you choose the other route, just out of curiosity?
I don't know. That's what the Polish were up doing. They all gave up and went home and left me and Mark there to finish the route. So we did. It was great. And then the next year I went to Makalu. Makalu is the 5th highest peak in the world. And spent 3 months on that. Didn't quite get to the top.
Someone's going to listen to this podcast and have to repeat what you did because it's never been done since then. So I'm just thinking they're going to.
I can show them where it is. Head them in that direction.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you, but that was just killing me. I'm like, someone's going to do that. They're going to listen to that and they're going to want to follow your footsteps.
So, well, anyways, the next year, this would be 86. I went to Makalu, the 5th highest peak in the world, and spent a lot of time on that. The next year, and
that's in the Himalayas as well.
Oh yeah, that's right next to Mount Everest on the other side. Yeah. Oh, these are 8,000 meter peaks. They're over 26,000 feet tall.
Wow.
The biggest ones in the world, and there's 14 of them. And so that was 2. The Choi Oyu was the 6th highest.
And when you spent 3 months, that's just getting acclimated and doing a lot of other smaller.
Well, working your way up the route.
Okay.
Yeah. Slowly.
So it takes 3 months
carrying
to get
loads, putting in camps, waiting for the weather to get good, getting your body. You have to increase your red blood cell count, get so you can breathe the air at 26,000 feet without bottled oxygen. We hadn't used any oxygen ever at this point, except for the available, what we have in the atmosphere.
Gotcha.
Then I went in 88. I guided a peak called Island Peak, which is a smaller one in the Himalayas. That was a commercial trip. Those first two were just for me. And then I went to Langtang in 1990. I had a permit for Everest for 91 by then. Me and Mark Ritchie had gotten the permit. And on Langtang, I set a record. One of the ropes broke, and I fell 2,200 feet, walked away from it.
Wow.
That was a good eye-opener, not to use thin ropes for fixed ropes. There was an avalanche hit us. The rope broke, and so I survived that one. So I used up one of my lives on that one.
I would say.
Fortunately, where I fell was kind of like falling down the head wall of Tuckermans. It was a straight shot, though we fell about 3 Tuckerman ravine head walls.
So dropping and rolling and skidding down.
Well, in the snow, too.
In the snow.
In the avalanche, yeah.
In the avalanche.
Yeah.
Trying to stay on top.
Yeah, sort of.
Wow.
And we did.
Yeah.
There was a couple other guys went down with me. We all survived okay. So now this would be my 5th Himalayan expedition, my 25th expedition overall. 1991, we went to Everest with 8 of us. We had 2 doctors. It's good to bring an extra one just in case something happens to the first one. You bring extra gear. So
yeah, that's smart. Yeah.
And it was Mark Ritchie and I were the 2 leaders. I was the expedition leader. He was what we call the climbing leader, which was kind of I guess you'd say we were the 2 bosses on the expedition. We had Mark Chauvin was a guide. He lives here in town. He worked for me at the time. Barry Rugo, a guy from Boston. Yves Lafarre, a guide that worked for me from Montreal, who worked for me a lot in South America. It was just friends. It was just, there was no commercial, nobody paying extra. It was all, and we paid about $10,000 each. We were there for 4 months. We did all the work. We put the ropes through the ice fall. We put in the camps. We carried the loads. We used Sherpas up to Camp 2. After that, we couldn't afford them. We got up to the high camp. We had to come all the way down, go all the way back to the high camp. The high camp's higher than Annapurna, which is one of the 14 highest peaks in the world. It's over 26,000 feet at the camp, which is usually the top of these bigger mountains. And then you got 3,000-foot climb to the top of Everest from there. It's 29,035 feet. So we got the weather. 4 of us summited. Mark and Yves Lafarre were about an hour ahead of Barry Rugo and I, summiting the peak by the Hillary route. We didn't use any ropes. We had 1 bottle of oxygen each on the trip for the summit climb, and that went well. And the other 4 either couldn't get to the top because they pooped out or they just used up too much energy earlier on in the trip. And so 4 of us, half the team, made the summit. We were there all alone. There was nobody else there.
Any other groups trying to summit?
At the beginning, there was 3 other groups. There was some Swiss, there was some Koreans, and there was some Italians, and they backed off and went home. It was kind of too much work for them. And then there was a guy named Ed Vistas, who's a very famous American. He was guiding a client, and his client didn't make it, but he eventually summited behind us alone. He came up. But we were all climbing, without a rope or anything. I mean, that's the way you do it.
Yeah.
So what happened, we were the first East Coast Americans to ever climb Everest. First guy from New Hampshire. Mark was first guy from Massachusetts. Barry was from Massachusetts, and Yves was from Montreal. So he was the first Quebecois ever to climb Everest. And so, we came back, and while business was on the brink of disaster, from being away, the lecturing business was good. I made enough money lecturing quite a bit to get the boat floating again here, and that was good. And then in 96, the first big commercial expeditions went to Everest. And actually in 95, they did pretty good. They got a few non-climbers to the top of Everest by guiding them. And they said, give us the money, we can get you to the top. 96, 2 competing companies went up there. They wouldn't turn back at noon, which was when you got to turn back on Everest because of the weather. Every afternoon, the sun creates storms and wind and clouds, and you just got to get out of there. You leave at midnight, you get to the top, you get out of there by noon.
Wow.
Well, they didn't. 14 people died.
Jeez.
It was called, the famous book came out, Into Thin Air. And people read that book, and they all wanted to climb Mount Everest.
Of course they did.
And so what's happened is what you see on TV now. 1,000 people are in base camp in May, waiting for Sherpas to fix 10 miles of rope to the top, for Sherpas and guides from various companies around the world to stock oxygen bottles in all the camps, to put in all the camps, to carry these people's packs up to the camps. And then when the weather window in May occurs, see, we summited on May 15th. This is the only time of the year you can go to the top of Everest is in the month of May. You get about a 10-day window. And then these people are told 200 a day can go up, stay at the various camps, use the oxygen. They usually have a Sherpa in front of them and a Sherpa behind them. They're cared for all the way to the summit, all the way down. And what happened this year is not uncommon. They got gridlock on that summit ridge just below the summit. Mm-hmm. Hundreds of them in a line. 11 people died standing there from hypothermia, from exhaustion, from running out of oxygen, because they're all in bottles. Once you go on bottled oxygen, you can't go off it. It's kind of like scuba diving, upside down.
Yeah.
You start using it, and you run out on top or near the summit, you just collapse.
And that's why you spent so much time up there prior to, so your body adjusts so you can breathe that air.
That's right. And all of us that went to the summit on Everest could have at least got down without bottled oxygen, because we were so well acclimated after being there for so long, for 3 months above 17,000 feet. And our red blood cells, we were right at that peak where if anything went wrong, we'd at least be able to get down. We wouldn't just collapse and faint. And so we had a successful, that one bottle that we used to get up there, that was great. It's good stuff. But, it wasn't something that was like scuba diving. But yet these guided people start at Camp 3, which is 23,000. And they usually use about 15 bottles and then never off it from there to the summit and all the way back down to the Camp 3. And if they go off, they're in great risk of either dying or at least being almost, they're certainly not going to be able to climb much.
So some of these people are running out of bottled oxygen.
And the Sherpas bring them down, and the guides, take care of them.
And the other picture I've seen on Everest is just oxygen bottles everywhere, discarded.
That's right. And that's another issue that needs to be addressed. Now, what's interesting is that the permit fee per person when I climbed it with my group of 8 was about $300 a piece. Mm-hmm. Now just the permit is $12,000.
Oh my goodness! Per person.
The government gets the $12,000. So you do the math: 12,000 times 1,000, or 500, 600, how many people are in base camp. The politicians split up that money. None of it goes to trail maintenance or cleanup or any kind of facilities for climbers, some kind of human waste disposal or something. None of it. That's all up to the climbers. In fact, I think you have to post a $50,000 bond now, and they count all the cans and wrappers and all the poop, and then if you don't bring it all back down, you're fined by the government for not doing that, which is a good thing. Mm-hmm. But again, there could be more management there with that money that comes in for the permit fees, but that's not the way they do it over there.
Right. And they probably have a lot to clean up from the times they didn't charge it.
I have to say the climbers do a pretty good job in general, but whenever you got that many people, and the higher you go, and the tougher life gets, the more difficult it is to do the right things.
Yeah, because it freezes.
Yeah.
Everything freezes.
That's right. So, if you got $100,000 you don't know what to do with, and you don't know much about climbing, but you're a good athlete, you can sign up for an Everest trip. It can be your first time you've ever wore double boots, first time you've ever had crampons on your feet, first time you've ever done anything like that ever, and they'll take you because there's so much money in it.
Right. Are you still doing that trip?
Oh, no. I only climbed it once with my friends. Now, I've been to the Himalayas 37 times.
Yes.
And I've climbed a lot of other peaks. The Himalayas have hundreds of huge mountains in them. You don't need to go to Mount Everest, but Mount Everest is Mount Everest. It's the highest. Yeah. When I did it, I had no idea that 28 years later, it would be a mob scene of rich people. There are no real climbers in that picture. You look at all those people on the ridge. Those are not real climbers. Those are just people either working, the Sherpas or the guides, or people being guided.
Wow.
That's all it is. And that rope goes all the way to the top. You're never off the rope the whole way up and down.
Wow.
And it's very inefficient, as you can see. You spend a lot of time waiting in line.
Well, it kind of was a shocker because there was a line at the head wall in Tuckermans a couple years ago. There's a wait at Tuckermans. I'm like, what do you mean there's a wait? Well, there's enough people on that trail that everybody has to wait for the next person to take a step. And I'm like, I think it was maybe Queen's Day. It was a popular hiking weekend. And I was like, first time I've ever heard of that. And I'm like, hiking is becoming so popular that, maybe that's the future.
Well, Tuckermans Ravine is like Mount Everest. How many peaks do we have in the White Mountains? If what do we got on top of Mount Washington? We have museums, we have trains, right. We have cars. You can get hit by a car on the summit of Mount Washington. The highest point
on the East Coast. You're right. It is, yeah.
A day when there are literally thousands of people on Mount Washington. How many people are on top of Mount Adams?
Yeah, no doubt. Good point.
Might be 10.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're alone. I've been on top of Mount Adams many times, all by myself with my friends, whoever I was hiking with.
Right.
Go up and spend the night in one of the Randolph lodges, a few other hikers. They're not, they're the people that are pretty well equipped. They got a pretty good idea what they're doing.
But you get the line to Mount Washington. Yeah, that's a great analogy.
And I think that's just our answer to Mount Everest is Mount Washington. I mean, it's the same thing.
You're absolutely correct. I never heard
it
framed that way, but you're right.
Quibbling with the observatory, quibbling with the auto road. I mean, that's what's going on Mount Everest. All these guide companies are one team is told, don't go up till Wednesday, and they go up on Monday, and there's not enough tents. And,
right.
They're not staying in line. They're not doing there's not much cooperation. And that's why they get that's why that gridlock happens.
Yeah. And it's just to say you've been there at the top of Mount Everest and the top of Mount Washington, when you're right, some of the other peaks are, my favorite's Jefferson.
Absolutely.
And you can look over and see Wash, and, we're just a hair shorter, but it's definitely...
it's a totally different experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you don't have your snacks and you don't have your drinks and you don't have your gear, you can get in trouble. You're on top of Mount Washington, you go in the restaurant and get a hot dog. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Or you get a ride on the cog, you get a ride down the road. And, that's one thing about having Mount Washington in my area. There was a lot of rescues there, but I had so many avenues to rescue people, trains, roads, AMC people, observatory, park. There was so many things that I had for resources to facilitate those.
Absolutely. And I hear you, because we've ridden up the Snowcat in the winter to help people. We've driven up the auto road. We've been up to Tuckermans in the Snowcat.
Yeah.
That's all good stuff. But why are we going up there? Why aren't we driving a Snowcat up Mount Adams? Well, yeah, we've been up Mount Adams a few times, but nowhere near as many. Yeah.
Right. You are absolutely correct. So some of the rescues in the Whites that stand out with you over, 40 years?
Well, I guess
besides the one sitting next to Abrahms, the frozen guys.
Yeah,
so that'll be memorable for me, and that was the first time I heard that story as well.
Well, there's a couple that come to mind. There was the Dr. Dahl event, which you may have been involved in back maybe 15, 20 years. It was just when cell phones first came out, and Dr. Dahl came over here to go hike up Mount Washington, and he just had his hips replaced, and he wanted to test them out. And he got here to the store, to IME, and we said, geez, the weather's not very good up there today. There's supposed to be a storm coming in. He said, oh, no, I'll be fine. Don't worry. And he actually bought a couple of pieces of clothing. He was supposed to meet his friends here, but the friends canceled because of the weather. He said, well, I'm going to go anyway. So we went up to Tinkham. And they said, oh, well, sure, hike up to Tuckermans, but don't go above Treeline. It's going to be snow, and it's going to be real nasty. It's October. And so he went up to Tuckermans. He met some people, and they said, oh, Jesus, it's not looking good above Treeline. Well, he went up the Lions Head Trail anyway. And he got to Treeline, and his hip was really hurting. So it's starting to snow, and he's thinking, well, it's pretty steep on that Lions Head Trail. Maybe I should go down the auto road. So I'll cut across the Alpine Gardens to get to the auto road and walk down that. Well, good plan, except that now you got a whiteout blizzard. And he gets to a trail sign just before the auto road that says Nelson Crag, 1 mile to the summit of Mount Washington, to your left. And he says, oh, well, I'm in trouble now. I'll go to the summit of Mount Washington. Well, he went on for 2 more cairns past that sign, which is right by the 7-mile mark, the auto road. If he'd gone another 100 feet, he would have been on the auto road.
There.
But he didn't. He headed up the trail, and he hunkered down with his cell phone by a cairn, and now the snow is piling up and wind's blowing, and he called 911. I'm on Nelson Crag. I need to be rescued. So you guys organized the rescue. As a matter of fact, we used the fishing game trucks with chains on them to go up the auto road to the 6 mile mark. Now, Nelson Crag is a feature well below where he was. He was on the summit cone.
Right.
Nelson Crag is down by the top of Huntington and lower down.
Mm-hmm.
We sent our team out in the evening now, in the dark, all over Nelson Crag, and we couldn't find him. And Mike Pelchat was there. And, as you know, he's a great asset to the rescue community.
Absolutely.
And Mike said, I'm just going to give this one more shot to go up the Nelson Crag Trail a few more feet. Of course, by now his cell phone's dead because the batteries are dead. And Mike found him under a snowbank, 2 cairns up from that sign by the auto road, because he said Nelson Crag. He didn't say Summit Cone he didn't even know where
he didn't know where he was.
He didn't know where he was. And they rescued him and they saved his life. He was hypothermic, he was unconscious, and he lived. And he went on to become the poster boy of mountaineering cell phones. And I had a big to-do with him about leave the damn cell phones home and you won't have to be rescued, because if he didn't have that cell phone, he wouldn't have kept going.
Right.
He would have gone down Treeline probably, or he wouldn't have gone up the Lion's Head Trail to begin.
Wouldn't have pushed.
He would have totally changed his plan.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, no, as long as I had my cell phone, I knew I was going to be rescued. And he was. By luck, he's alive today because he gave us the wrong information. And this is before we could GPS cell phones and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, now everybody had to have a cell phone. So that's not exactly my favorite tool out there.
Nor mine, because I think our rescues have increased since cell phones.
47% of New Hampshire has no cell service. There's none in the town I live in Eden. It's
and yet we have it on the top of Mount Washington.
It's just not. Yeah, it's not just the mountains, valleys. It's right here in town.
Right.
Have cell service. So that's one that certainly stood out in my mind, and this gets kind of into an area that I found interesting, where we had another fella with a similar hip replacement over on Lafayette who decided to do a traverse, I guess a couple of days out into real bad weather. It poured. He was eventually rescued through the night. We were up to our waist in water coming down the Fallen Waters Trail. And at this point, Fish and Game was becoming a little overloaded with rescue missions. And of course, they're working with us now. This is more modern times. We have the elite team. We're sending officers out almost every day on hiking missions. We're working together on these more difficult ones, nighttime litter carries and who knows what. And so some of the people in Concord decided that maybe we should charge for these rescues. And it's kind of like, if somebody crashes their car and it's just an accident, you don't fine them.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're drunk driving and they crash, or they're doing reckless driving, then they're fined.
Right.
So if you would look at the rescue business like that and say, if we got an idiot out there who broke the rules and needs to be rescued, then we should bill them. And this is the way it was explained to me by one of the, probably Marty or somebody who was very involved in the rescue
Fish
business.
and Game, probably.
Yeah. And he said, well, this is how we look at it. If a guy and his wife and 2 kids go out hiking with no headlamp in the fall, and they get stuck 3 miles up a trail, and we have to go get them and walk them out with a headlamp, that's not smart, but it's not reckless.
Right.
If a person goes out and falls down and breaks their leg, and we have to go get them, that's not reckless.
Nope.
It's just a car accident.
Just happened. Yep.
If a guy goes into Dry River and there's a big sign that says the trails ahead have been destroyed by Katrina, please don't enter. If you do, you do at your own risk.
Right.
So you climb over the sign, go up into Dry River, and then call 911.
Right.
You send that guy a bill?
That's reckless.
Absolutely.
And it's put search and rescue people at risk,
too.
That's
right.
And that's the biggest thing I have. And with so many rescues and using the same people constantly, it wears people out. If it's your third rescue of the weekend, you are working at half speed probably anyways.
That's right.
And now you're putting those people that are tired at risk by being reckless.
So I think that we need to be a little bit better communicating to our livelihood, which is the tourists that come to use, hunt,
no
and
doubt.
fish, and boat and everything else, and tell them that it doesn't matter what activity they're doing. If they're reckless boaters, if they're reckless hunters, if they're reckless hikers,
absolutely,
yeah, they might get a bill for their actions. But if they're just out there recreating and something happens, that's going to happen.
That happens.
Then we're glad as volunteers. Fish and Game is doing their job to help these tourists. And guys in Concord give the Fish and Game the money they need to do their job.
Absolutely.
They whine about $200,000.
Yeah.
What are you guys talking about?
When the tourism brings in
millions and millions of dollars in lodging and meals tax. They just the economy of this whole area up here is dependent on them driving up here, and even if it's up in Berlin where they're now tearing around in four wheelers, this is all part of our livelihood.
Absolutely.
I hear Fish and Game whine about them a little bit. I guess you have an accident a week up there or something.
It's quite
Well, okay, it gives you something to do, but I guess the point being that if this is what we're here to do, then let's support the Fish and Game and give them the $200,000 in overtime. And quite frankly, if those guys have worked all week and then they're called out to go out all night, they deserve that money. That's their job,
right?
Yeah. And just like we have our jobs down here that are dependent on tourism,
but we couldn't do it without the volunteers, and that is so much more that the volunteers give freely to do the same thing that Fish and Game is getting paid to do, which just, it just says so much for those people. Most of them are hikers. Most of them are committed to that group. And man, I'll tell you what, we got an awesome group of people that help with that.
But think about it, even a little bit more, we're a very self-serving group. 9 times Mountain Rescue has rescued team members. And who would rescue them if there wasn't a Mountain Rescue? Oh,
boy. You're right.
So when I go out and hang off the cliff, I know if I get in trouble, which I hope I never will, I carry a cyanide pill. They'll never take me alive. But if something were to happen, that a good team would come and get me. And I guess, when you read some of the new books that have come out on Mountain Rescue, one of the theories is let them all go out there and let them all die. If they go past the road, they're on their own. No rescue teams, no Fish and Game, nobody go get them. Well, what if that's your kid? What if it's your friend? What if it's,
when you frame it like that,
these
we all know how we would react.
Aren't all just from New Jersey. I mean, they can be your neighbor. They can be a team member of our team. And so I feel that the rescue that we have in New Hampshire is unique in the United States. Other states look at us, and then they get the idea, we'll just bill everybody for the rescues. That's the only part of the equation that doesn't fit for me. Bill the reckless people like you would any other thing in life. And let's take care of our friends that are out there in the mountains.
No doubt.
It's us and us.
No doubt. Any of this high angle stuff, because that's when I think ropes, I think of Mountain Rescue Service. When I need ropes, that's what I'm calling the Mountain Rescue Service team, because that's getting above, even though we have some people, we don't have a lot of people. So we need help, and we need our people to work with your people on that type of stuff. So, the Cannon Cliffs always come in, and you guys have done some outstanding work on Cannon Cliffs. I mean, that's something you can see. You can sit in the parking lot with a spotting scope and watch you work. We had a famous rescue on Cannon on the Whitney Gilman Ridge, which is one of the famous climbs there, many years ago, where one of the climbers on Mountain Rescue got his leg stuck in a crack. And we went up and we greased up his leg with axle grease and pounded some wedges in above and below his knee and popped him out and brought him down. Wow. That was ingenious, actually, the axle grease idea.
Sometimes you have to, figure out how you're going to do that. And the problem is the more he wiggled his knee, the more it swelled. So it got worse and worse.
I think about that climber out west that had to cut his arm off because he got wedged in a similar situation. Except
kind of like that. Yeah.
A leg, I don't think you would have survived that.
No, we weren't going to cut his leg off.
No,
we got him out of there.
Yeah, boy. Yeah. And that's by hanging on a rope in a harness next to a guy. So
4 or 5 hours in that crack before we got to him and brought him.
Yeah. That's unbelievable, and that's the thing those books are written about, and the thing I appreciate about you guys that you can actually go up there and do that, because
I don't want to begin with. I learned early. I was in New River Gorge, West Virginia, and I did some climbing down there. Loved rappelling. Rappelling was great. Climbing, yeah, it just wasn't for me.
But rappelling is very dangerous, as you well know.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's more dangerous than the climbing. It's more accidents rappelling than actually climbing.
But it was a lot more fun, I guess, to me.
But this brings just, I think, one more thought to my mind about this whole rescue business is at what decision level do we tell our team members, whether it be Fish and Game or Forest or whoever, mountain rescue, that there's too much danger involved in what we're doing and we're not going to do it.
Yes.
And the general public does not understand that, you know, when somebody gets in trouble above timberline in 100-mile-an-hour wind at minus 20 in the middle of the night and needs help and we don't know where they are, that helicopters are not going to fly out of the sky and people are not going to come and search the whole presidential range overnight.
Right.
I mean, with the Kate thing, we knew at least where she was with the spot, but then the spot thing gave us...
Yeah, it gave us like 12 different locations.
Right. So was that a good call to tell our team members not to go above timberline? Absolutely.
Yeah, and people got to understand that too. It's,
you know, we can't... We've lost one climber once, Albert Dow, in an avalanche in Tuckermans, hunting for lost, you know, climbers in Huntington, and that's enough. And one of the things I've always talked to lieutenants who are doing these, like you say, when you call me, what do we talk about? We talk about the risks to the team. Can we do this? How can we do this? How can we do this safely?
And we're talking to the best people, in my opinion, in the world that do this. So, you know, if I'm having any doubts and then you're having any doubts, it's, you know, we're not going to put ourselves at risk. And, you know, that's very important, especially when you're talking about negative 96 with the Cape Traumatrosova was the second coldest place in the world. And we were sending out rescue teams and they struggled. They struggled, at least our end struggled. And for us, we're that type A personality. We're those guys that want to peak no matter what. Yeah. So that's the hardest decision, I think, for us, and to put ourselves in that same place is to say no, because we like saving people. We want to save people, even if we put our own life at risk. But, you know, and that's the job of the lieutenant, the supervisor, to say no, and then the job of the officer to understand it.
The Fish and Game and the Forest Service have never told me what to do, whether I liked it or not. They've never said, go there and do that. They've always said, what do you think?
Yes.
And we'll discuss it.
Yep.
And we'll make a decision.
And ultimately, it's your decision.
Well,
because I'm never going to tell you, or no one's ever going to tell you to go.
Right.
It's your decision because you're going.
But if I tell you we can't do that,
yes,
you're not going to sit there and go, what a bunch of weenies, you know?
No, because I know it's
right.
If you're going to say you can't do that, then it can't be done.
Right.
You know, that's.
There's no point in killing any more of our rescue team members.
Absolutely. And we are so lucky to have guys like you, and, you know, to use the presidential range as your base camp. Yeah. So we can use you as a resource, so you can be a resource with us. And, you know, I think the only other Fish and Game agency, Maine, the Maine Warden Service, you know, works similar to us. And I don't think they do as many missions because they don't have the terrain that we do. We don't have the whites, and, you know, they have Katahdin. So,
I know all about Katahdin.
Yes, you've done Katahdin quite a few times.
Been up there on rescue missions. It's a little different world up there, but we won't discuss that today.
Yeah. No, that's great. So, no, I really appreciate all your years of dedication and volunteerism, Rick, to helping rescues in the mountains. You know, the relationships you've built with volunteers, with the Fish and Game, with the Forest Service, it's priceless. It really is. And to bring, you know, listeners into that and kind of give us a better feeling of the experience you bring to the table, and how you've helped us through the years to build this mountain rescue team is just outstanding, and it's going to continue on. You've got a lot of people that you've put into play and that are capable. So I really appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you.
Please join me, Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and other game wardens on our adventures protecting wildlife, saving lives, and having fun, all while serving the public and the natural resources of our planet. Listen to the tales and experiences of those who work in the outdoors while being entertained with stories about encounters with poachers, wildlife investigation, murder investigation, near-death experiences, search and rescue missions, wildlife interactions from game wardens around the country and around the world. When I retired, I realized I couldn't let go of that legacy, but rather wanted to share the passion, the commitment, and the stories of those men and women that call themselves game wardens. This is Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and this is Warden's Watch.